So I had a guitar lesson the other day with a student that I've been teaching for a long time, and she told me right off the bat she wanted to learn a certain song. And I got excited because it had been a long time since she's come in and said that she wanted to learn a particular song, and I'm like, which one? And it was funny because she had to sit there for a second. She was thinking, she's like, oh, I just had it. I was like, well, who's it by? We'll figure it out. And she couldn't even tell me that. So then I laughed and I told her how funny it was that back in the day when she first started learning guitar, she had a whole bunch of music that she loved. She would come in and she'd have all these bands that she wanted to learn from, these different songs. She even knew all the lyrics to the songs. And she's like, no, just hold on, I'll get it. And finally she realized that it was Montero by Little Nas X. And I'm like, okay, how does that go? I was kind of testing her a little bit. And she couldn't really sing me anything. It was really interesting. And so I laughed and I said, well, what you just showed me in the last minute is basically a microcosm of what I've experienced through my whole teaching career from about 1997 till today. How so many of my students back in the day had such an intense love for music. And then as the years went by, it seemed like less and less people had that kind of a connection to music. It was almost like it became a lot more disconnected. So what I want to do today is give you guys a quick tour of what I've experienced through all these years of teaching private lessons. And then, I don't know, it's not all depressing, by the way. There are a lot of really cool nostalgic moments, whether it's certain bands or songs or technologies that you remember from back in the day. But I just wanted to tell you my story and show you how I got really jaded as a guitar teacher at one point, and then how I eventually regained my hope. So let's start with around 1997. That's when I really started teaching guitar as a career, taking it very seriously. And my first student came in, and I remember I was worried that he was going to be really good and that I would have nothing to show him. But he came in with a Green Day CD. And it was great because he handed it to me. He's like, I just want to be able to play these songs. And he knew all the songs in order. He knew the band members' names, and he knew most of the lyrics. So it was really cool to see that. I was like, this kid really loves music, at least Green Day. He really loves Green Day. And I taught him some of the songs, and he caught right onto it. And it was really great to see him get so excited about learning a Green Day song. And that's what it was like for most of my students back then. They would come in with the actual CDs of these bands, sometimes up to like 5 different CDs, and they'd be like, I want to learn this song here, and they would hand it to me, and it was great. It was a real exciting time for teaching. Back then, the main bands that people were into, I wrote these down, were Green Day, Smashing Pumpkins, Everclear, Nirvana, Real Big Fish, Korn, Radiohead, Blink-182, Chili Peppers, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and The Offspring, those kind of bands. And it was cool to see that, you know, I lived through the grunge era and it was still carrying over the grunge/alternative era into my teaching in the later 90s. And I believe the reason they knew so much about these bands is because whenever they bought a CD, it would come with the liner notes, and they would spend time just looking through it and memorizing the names of the band members. And like what I used to do is I used to memorize little details like which recording studio they recorded at, where they had their album mastered. I knew all these names of engineers and stuff like that, especially with Metallica albums. So back then you had that ability to look through liner notes and to learn a lot more about the bands that you cared about. And what was really impressive back then was that students would come in and they didn't just want to learn the hit songs. They would actually say like, okay, I want to learn this riff in track 8. So it was some song that was buried in the album. And they would still know about it because all they had was the CD. So they would sit and listen to the whole thing. And they knew about the deeper cuts, which I feel is very important to keep in mind as this video progresses. It was cool to have someone bring in like Master of Puppets and be like, yeah, I want to learn how to play this riff in Leper Messiah or something like that. So I really enjoyed that people didn't just know the hits, but they knew the deeper cuts as well. Then around 1999 through about 2001, we have what I call the Napster/CDR era. And that's when Napster came out, LimeWire, and all of a sudden you had access to all this music, all these MP3s. And what my students would do most of the time is they would download songs and then they would burn it onto a CDR. And this was kind of the beginning of music changing as far as with my student base, but it still had a little bit of connection with my students because what they would do is they would find songs that they loved, they would put it on a CDR, and then they would take a marker and they would write the band name and the song title artfully usually on the CD, and they would design it a little bit, and I thought that's kind of cool. They're sort of making it their own thing. You know, they would hand me the CDR and I'm like, oh, this is kind of a work of art. And then we would learn songs that way. So even though now they're compiling songs or not bringing in entire albums, at least I felt like they still had a good connection to the artists that they loved. Now, because they were putting single songs as a compilation onto a CDR for me, they didn't know the deeper cuts as well as they used to. I noticed that was a big change. So somebody came in with a song, a song by The Offspring. I kind of knew which one it was going to be. It was going to be one of like 4 songs. And it was very rare that somebody put a deeper cut on these compilations. So I found that very interesting. The bands that were pretty big around this time, from what I can remember, were like The Strokes, Linkin Park, Foo Fighters, System of a Down, POD, Creed, Stained, and Incubus, groups like that. So it was a very exciting time in music because all of a sudden we had this new access to all these songs. I remember specifically my friend downloaded for me every single album from certain artists. And I thought, this is great. This is like having everything I ever wanted to have. The strange part is, even though I had all this music suddenly on my computer, I never listened to much of it at all. Maybe a few songs, and then I would skip around. And it almost felt like music started becoming a little more disposable at this time. So before that, I would buy like a 9 Inch Nails CD, for example, and I would consume it, every bit of it, like I said. Now I would see a bunch of folders on my desktop and it would have all the 9 Inch Nails albums. And I found myself just sort of looking through the titles, clicking here and there, but not really getting deep into anything. So around 2001 to 2005, things started getting weird. I remember the first time a student brought in an iPod, and instead of handing me a CD or a CDR to put in my CD player to learn music from, they would actually say, do you have an aux cord? And I'm like, this is weird. So I ended up going out getting an aux cable, and they would hook it up and they would say, this is what I want to learn. And it was just sort of a sign to me that things were going to be changing. Now, even though they were making compilations with the CDRs, now what they were doing is they were making digital playlists. And the problem with this now was that instead of having maybe 12 to 15 songs on a CDR, which you could still keep track of and get some depth out of, they were making 100 song playlists. So they'd be scrolling for a long time to get to the song that they wanted. And I thought that was kind of strange. And I did notice that the deeper cuts were starting to get lost completely. Now it seemed like they were really just putting the hit songs on these playlists. At least my students were. And so it was getting even more predictable to what they were going to want to learn. And that was really sad for me because I found when I was younger, I usually found the gems hidden deep within certain albums. And so that was kind of getting lost to the singles culture, if you will. So the bands that were kind of bigger at that time, from what I remember, were Def Cab for Cutie, Hoobastank, White Stripes, Jimmy Eat World, Muse, Nickelback, Static X, Sum 41, Tool, Disturbed, and Evanescence. Once again, it was a great time for music. It's just that how people were listening to music and consuming music, it was changing a lot, very drastically at that time. So a shining moment that happened around that time, like around 2003, School of Rock came out. And all of a sudden, a lot of the younger generation, a lot of my students, saw this crazy guy, Jack Black, talking and playing AC/DC songs and Led Zeppelin. And it really invigorated their curiosity for this kind of music, because I think up until then they were thinking, oh, that's just crap my dad listens to. Now they were coming in and asking, hey, can you play Highway to Hell or whatever? And it was a really interesting, cool time to be a guitar teacher, and I kind of miss it. Then we get to about 2005 to 2008. And this is when we start getting into the YouTube era. And that was very interesting because now students were showing up with nothing. They didn't have a CD, CDR, they didn't have an iPod or anything. They would just come in and say, this is what I want to learn. Look it up on YouTube. And so that was just a new way for me to teach. But the problem with that is a lot of the times the students would only come in asking for the big hits. Now it's like the deeper tracks were gone completely. And they didn't really know much about the songs. It was more of like they didn't know who the band members were. They didn't know what album these songs were from. And so it was kind of sad because now the liner notes have been long gone and everything to them was just a title. So they would come in with a song title and then we would learn a riff or two off of it. But once again, guitar got a huge boost, well, music in general at the time, from a little game called Guitar Hero. I remember when this came out, I was like, wow, this is next level, because all of a sudden I had students coming in asking me to play songs that I never thought they even knew existed, because they didn't until the game. So somebody would come in and say, can I play the song by Kansas? I'm like, sure, how did you know about that? Oh, from Guitar Hero. Okay, that's cool. So I started playing the game myself, and I'm like, wow, now all these bands and all these songs are going to be in the forefront of people's minds again. So I had a ton of fun as a guitar teacher at the time, teaching students these songs. However, there was a downfall. It's a double-edged sword, much like a lot of things. They would get frustrated easily if they started lessons because of Guitar Hero, because they thought it was going to be as easy as pushing 5 buttons. And so when it was a little more difficult than they thought, a lot of them fell off quickly. But those who stuck around ended up getting pretty good, because not only did they have a great collection of songs to want to learn, but they passed the Guitar Hero test, I call it. They went past just wanting to push 5 buttons, and they made it to the real thing. Bands that were big around that time that I remember were My Chemical Romance, The Killers, Godsmack, Arctic Monkeys, Rise Against, Avenged Sevenfold was big, a lot of it because of Guitar Hero, and Shinedown, bands like that. So that era, even though it was very strange because we were learning a lot of stuff online on YouTube, off of YouTube, it was like building me up for the big fall I was about to have. And that's when around 2008 happened. And that's when iPhones were getting big. A lot of my students were coming in with their phones and they had all their songs on them. And you would think that wouldn't be a big thing. You'd think that'd be a lot like when iPods were around. But something happened around that time. And I'll never forget, it was one moment that completely destroyed my soul. And it was when a student came in, brand new student, young kid, and I asked him straight out, I'm like, well, what kind of music are you into? You know, why do you want to play guitar? What kind of music do you want to play? And all of a sudden he got this kind of blank, panicky look, like he had no idea. So what does he do? He reaches for his phone and he goes, oh, what do I like? Let's see. And he starts scrolling through and my heart just dropped. The second he said, what do I like? And he scrolled through his phone to figure that out. I was just like, okay, I hope this isn't a trend. I hope this is an isolated case. Well, it wasn't. A lot of my new students that started joining around that time all had the same thing, where they really didn't even know what they liked anymore. They just had to look it up. They had to look up their playlist that maybe someone else made for them, or they had to see what kind of background music was going on in a certain video game that they liked. And to me, I thought, man, this is the death of music here, as far as the love of music, the connection with music. And it all happened around 2008, 2009. So like I said, this is when I completely got jaded. I was like, I never thought this day would come, but I don't feel like the love of music is there anymore with my students. And it really made it hard to want to be a guitar teacher, to want to continue teaching guitar. So for a while, I just stalled. I just taught guitar for guitar's sake. Like, here are the basics. So no matter what you get into later, at least you'll be able to go there with what I give you. Now, I said that I got really jaded, but then there's an upswing, right? So the silver lining on all this is that went on for a lot of years. And then just when I got to my lowest point where I'm just like, ugh, I don't feel inspired anymore to teach, suddenly my YouTube channel got big. And then my website got big. And it was like, okay, now I've gone global. So because I only had a little community of people around my area that took private lessons, I got jaded kind of quickly because I had a smaller sample size, you know? And all of a sudden I was able to teach the world. And next thing I knew, I was getting responses and emails from people that were super passionate about music. I'm like, you guys are actually out there. I just had to get a bigger sample size to find you. And so that really reinvigorated my love of teaching, and it changed everything for me. I don't know how much longer I would have been teaching guitar if it's not for the ability to now reach out and to find those people that are actually passionate about music. So thank you. And I have to add that even though I make it sound really dire for a while there, even during those times, I still had my outlier students who would come in and they were really young and they loved like Amy Winehouse or, Nirvana or Metallica, or, they would surprise me. 9 times out of 10, it was because their parents were into really cool music at the time and they influenced their kids. And then they would come to me and ask to want to learn that kind of music. But just the fact that so many students that were coming in, the influx of students were kind of clueless to music at all, really put me down for a while. Like I said, until the YouTube thing happened. So that's basically it. That's the journey from teaching from 1997 to now, and how it kind of, did this roller coaster thing until I got almost to rock bottom, and then I was able to finally take off thanks to you guys. So anyway, I love ending with a happy ending, and I appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully that was fun for you to listen to, and we'll catch you guys at the next lesson, okay? Thanks everyone. Bye.